Good evening. Welcome to EmpowerU. Those of you online, thank you for attending also. I'm Betty Overstreet, the Executive Director. It's good to see so many of you here, and I hate to disappoint you, but Jerry's not selling tickets to Mars tonight. He might be giving one away, I don't know, but he's not selling tickets. EmpowerU was founded by Dan Reginald 11 years ago, or I should say in 2011. He's also the founder and owner of Frame USA. Dan's vision for EmpowerU was to have classes on a diverse number of topics. Before we had this lovely studio here, I wasn't working with them then, but they used to travel all around the city. They would have meetings in libraries, schools, wherever they could find space. So it's really nice to have one place to come to with such great equipment so that we can put it all online. We do welcome any of your comments about any of our classes, whether they're good or bad. We also appreciate any feedback that you might have on classes you'd like for us to have, because some of our classes do come from those people that recommend them to us. We are run by donations only, so towards the end of our class, we do pass around our little red buckets, and anything that you'd like to give, if you feel like you'd like to give something, is very much appreciated. Our speaker tonight is going to take questions at the end of his class. If you have a question at the end of his presentation, please raise your hand and wait for one of us to bring a microphone to you so that everyone in the studio, as well as people online, can hear the question. And next, I would like to have Dan Reginald. Oh yeah, I always forget that, couple classes. So this Thursday is coffee tasting. How many here drink coffee? How many, I should say, how many don't drink coffee? That's me. I thought I was the only one. Every time I say I don't drink coffee, I get funny looks. But maybe you and I will start drinking coffee after this class, because Dr. Jay Rissover is supposed to tell us the good things about it. I think he's probably going to tell us some bad things too, but anyway, I hope you'll make it to that class. Next Thursday, we will not be in the studio. We're going down to Shemrick and Lee's Distillery in Norwood for a bourbon tasting night. That's a fun class, our first fun class for this season. We'll be taking a tour, tasting 4 bourbons. We will have some food there, and that is a class that we do require payment for. So go online and sign up, and we've got pretty many signed up already. Then on April the 15th, I think Dan's probably going to come up here and talk about that, but that's going to be our 10-year anniversary of the Tea Party. Going to have a number of people here kind of giving an idea of when the Tea Party started, how it transvolved, and where it is today, where those people that kind of started the Tea Party, what they're doing. So anyway, if Dan would come up, we do have a door prize that we'll be giving away. So get out your tickets.
Your lucky ticket. Okay, so hold on. Let me try to set this up, Betty. Hold on just a minute. So what we've got is here, our operations manager, Jill, got us this cool book on Mars. And better than that, this is your passport right here, okay? So just get ready to go, okay, Jerry? You can't win because you're going anyway, right? Okay, so we're gonna have Jerry, would you draw a ticket? Last 3 numbers for the passport in the book, 939. That's why you sit in the front row, guys, right there. Congratulations. Thank you. Go home, pack your bags. Now, does the passport, is it good for 2, Betty, do you know, or just one? So, okay, save your tickets. We got one more drawing. Okay, one more little drawing. But, you know, I've just got a pretty good friend of mine that owns a Chick-fil-A store right over here in Springdale. One of the greatest guys I've ever met, all the stuff that he does. And I don't know if some of you have read, but for the second time in 2 weeks, conservative-leaning chain Chick-fil-A has been blocked from opening a new restaurant. The first time in this airport of San Antonio, Texas. The second time in the city of Buffalo, New York. According to New York State Assemblyman Sean Ryan, plans to open a Chick-fil-A in the food court of the Buffalo Niagara International Airport have been scrapped because of the chain's history of donating to anti-LGBTQ groups like the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and the Salvation Army. I just have found that these people are the salt of the earth people whenever I've dealt with them, and I want to support them as much as possible. So I've got a little gift card for you. Hopefully you can, but give me my tickets back, Betty. You threw the tickets away, Betty? My goodness. I have never, in all my years of EmpowerU, 400 classes, have I ever been in a position where my tickets got thrown away. Okay, let's pick one out of the waste can, Betty. Come on. And it is the waste can. Okay, everybody, this is real live drama, everybody online. See what you miss? 954. 954. It's recycling. So for a gift card to Chick-fil-A, congratulations. Let's give both of our winners a round of applause. So how many of you came to our class on the Electoral College? It was an incredible class. It was just one of the best classes we've ever had. And it's funny how these things come around. Right after the class, a lot of people around the country started linking the video on our website, telling people to watch it. And lo and behold, today in Ohio, two groups, the Franklin County Democratic Party and a group called, let me see if I can read my small print. It is the Ohio Democratic Women filed a constitutional amendment to join the compact that would make Ohio not follow the Electoral College. And they're going to try to put that on the ballot for you to vote on in November. This is an article about it. And first they have to get 414,000 signatures. But if they get that, it would be scary for Ohio not to have a hand in determining the president. Really, the only places that would be California, New York, Illinois, and maybe one or two other states. So I'm going to leave this with my teammate, Mr. Bill Roll, our treasurer. Let's give him a round of applause. And let's give Betty, our executive director with the trash can back there, a round of applause. And our producer, Jay Grunke, back there too. Let's thank him for his help. A couple other things I just wanted to go over with you. So we're entering the tasting part of our EmpowerU series, Thursday night coffee. We'll all be staying up late after that. That'll be fun. If you haven't seen Dr. Rissover speak ever, he's really a funny guy, and he'll probably talk a lot about medicine too. It'll be an interesting class. He's bringing with him somebody from La Terza, which is a really designer coffee company. They brew their own coffee, and I'm kind of expecting it to be all laid out here, and we're going to go at it. It's going to be fun. And then Thursday, a little bourbon tasting. Bourbon drinkers, how many do we have in here? A few here and there. I bet back there. That should be fun. I was speaking to Mike Wilson, who founded the Cincinnati Tea Party a day or two ago, about our big event on the 15th. So have you ever heard, you guys know who AOC is? You know who she is? Yeah. So I think she's going to help our class out a lot, because yesterday she came out and said, let me see, me see if I can get this quote exactly right. She said, the founding of the Tea Party was the start of the white supremacist movement. So we've got that to look forward to with our anniversary in a couple weeks. If you're going to come to that class, or even if you just want to help us out, we're going to be collecting coffee and tea to give away to our charity Fill the Truck that night. You could just bring some tea bags, and that'll be fun. Well, I think that's it. So let's go on to our topic tonight, which should be lots of fun. Jerry Black is a retired engineer who's worked in the aerospace industry for over 40 years. His educational background includes a bachelor's degree in aerospace and mechanical sciences from Princeton University and a master's degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Michigan. Is that like rocket science, Jerry? We've got the right guy. We've got the right guy for this class, I can tell you. Yeah, he worked as a rocket test engineer at Bell Aerospace Company from 67 to 68. One of the rocket engines that Jerry helped test was the engine for the ascent stage of the Apollo lunar module. Wow. Following this, he worked for 39 years as a staff engineer at GE Aviation, where he worked on jet engine development. He's got lots of side interests. He's a member of the Space Development Steering Committee and Advocacy Group that works on space policy issues. And other activities include tutoring, contra dancing, which I'm interested in finding out about what that is, bridge, and chess. Let's give a warm welcome to Jerry, who will talk to us tonight.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, good.
Our online people are right up there. If you could just come right around, right up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Is this good? Okay, this evening I'll be telling you about Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk is a billionaire. He's an inventor. He's an innovator. And he's one of the most brilliant and visionary entrepreneurs of modern times. He's founded several different companies, and the most well-known of his companies are Tesla, which manufactures electric cars, and SpaceX, which builds launch vehicles and spacecraft. And I'm a retired aerospace engineer, so naturally I'm going to be concentrating on SpaceX. I've also had a lifelong interest in Mars and Mars exploration, so I'll be talking about his audacious plan to build a city on Mars. So Elon Musk was born and grew up in South Africa, but he had an unhappy childhood. He had a very demanding father, and he was bullied in grade school. Now, South Africa wasn't a place for opportunities for his entrepreneurial spirit. So he wanted to come to the US, and he couldn't come directly to the US, but it turned out that his mother had Canadian citizenship. And the law was such that if your parent had Canadian citizenship, then you could claim Canadian citizenship. And he knew if he went to Canada, it would be easy to get into the US. So at the age of 17, he immigrated to Canada, and he came by himself. His rest of his family stayed behind in South Africa, although in later years, many of the other members of his family followed him to Canada and to the US. He got accepted at the University of Pennsylvania and earned 2 degrees, one in economics and the other degree was in physics. And then he enrolled at graduate school at Stanford University, but after only 2 days, he dropped out in order to pursue an entrepreneurial career. One thing I like about Elon Musk, he's highly motivated to have a positive influence on the world. And he decided on 3 primary areas of interest where he thought he could have the most positive effect. And the 3 areas of interest are the internet, space travel, and renewable energy. He has an extremely high work ethic. Many days he works more than 100 hours, or many weeks he works more than 100 hours in a week. And he's been known to take a sleeping bag to work so he can, at critical times, so he doesn't have to drive back and forth. He has 5 children by his first wife, and they're all boys. That includes a set of twins and a set of triplets. Well, his first area of interest is the internet, and he was involved in 3 different companies. The first company he founded was Zip2. Then he founded the company X.com, and then X.com merged with another company, and they became PayPal, which is the online payments company that most of you are familiar with. So Elon Musk became the CEO of PayPal for a brief time, and he also was the principal shareholder of PayPal. So when PayPal was sold to eBay, Elon Musk's shares were worth $165 million. So that was the beginning of his wealth. But now he's worth more than somewhere around $20 million. Oh, I should mention Starlink isn't an actual company, but Starlink is a constellation of Earth orbiting satellites that his company SpaceX will be building and also launching into orbit. And these Earth orbiting satellites are meant to bring the internet to everybody in the world, even remote areas where you don't have cable and you don't have cell phone towers. So with the money he got from PayPal, he started SpaceX, and then his third area of interest, he started 2 companies shortly thereafter, Tesla and SolarCity. And he essentially bet all of his money that he had made from PayPal on these 2 companies. And he's also founded other projects and companies, but for lack of time, I'm not going to cover those other companies. So one thing he noticed was he was very dismayed about the stagnation in the space program. And he surmised correctly that the thing that's really holding back the space program is the very high cost of launching things into space. So he wanted to do something about that, and he founded SpaceX. Now, one of the methods that he uses is called first principles. And what he did, he looked at the cost of raw materials that are in a rocket. And then he looked at how much it costs to manufacture a rocket, or how much it should cost. And he figured out that he should rather easily be able to build a rocket at just a small fraction of the cost of the traditional launch providers. SpaceX uses simple and modular design. And the Falcon 9 rocket is 2-stage. One example of this is that they use the same engine, the Merlin engine, in both the first and second stages. And they also use the same fuel in both stages. They use vertical integration, which means that just about everything is built in-house, all the major parts. And this contrasts with the other launch companies that were buying critical parts like the rocket engines. They were subcontracting those out. He hired the best talent, and he uses modern manufacturing techniques such as 3D printing. And he uses the latest design tools. And Elon Musk is very brilliant. He read everything he could about rocket engines and about spacecraft and launch vehicles. And he became not only the CEO of SpaceX, but he became their chief engineer, their chief designer. And he's made some very wise engineering choices. And the thing that he also realized, in order to cut down the cost vastly from the present launch price costs, the key to that is reusability. So why is reusability so important? Well, it turns out that the cost of the propellant is only 0.3% of the cost of launching a launch vehicle. That's 0.3%, so it's really negligible. Most of the remaining cost is in the launch vehicle, just about all of it. And launch vehicles, it's the only form of transportation where the vehicle is used only once and then discarded. So imagine if a commercial airplane were used just once and then discarded. The cost of a ticket would be astronomical, and there wouldn't be much of an airline industry. Now on this Falcon 9 vehicle, a two-stage vehicle, he realized it was most important to recover the first stage because that's 75% of the cost of the vehicle. That's because the first stage has 9 rocket engines. The second stage only has 1 rocket engine and it's smaller. And it's also very important that very minimal refurbishment be done. Because if you look back on the space shuttle was reusable, but after every launch of the space shuttle, you had to overhaul the engines and you had to either repair or replace a lot of the thermal protection tiles. So it took months to do that after every launch, and turned out that it was more expensive to launch a payload on the space shuttle than on an expendable launch vehicle. So the space shuttle was never economical. Well, it turns out that the government has funded 6 different programs that I know of to develop a reusable launch vehicle that, unlike the space shuttle, is actually cost effective. And all of these government programs failed. So it's not an easy thing to develop a reusable launch vehicle. So he knew this would be difficult. SpaceX first tried parachutes, parachuting the rocket into the ocean. But that didn't work, and they quickly abandoned that idea. And Elon Musk analyzed the problem, and he picked what he thought was the best way, and I think it is the best way, which is powered vertical landing. And he knew this would be very tricky. So he built a test vehicle, which he called the Grasshopper, which goes up and down to practice the vertical takeoffs and landings and to lessen the risk when he actually tried it with the Falcon 1. Okay, so next he tried soft landings in the ocean. And once that was perfected, he tried landing on a drone ship. Now by drone ship, we mean a ship that is completely autonomous. There's no crew aboard. Now, naturally, you wouldn't want a crew aboard when you try to land one of these rockets, because that would be highly dangerous. Well, the first few landings on the drone ship failed. And the first successful landing actually occurred when the Falcon 9 first stage powered itself back to Cape Canaveral and landed on a landing pad close to where it had taken off. Later, they perfected drone ship landings as well. Now, you can imagine that he had several failures in trying to perfect this technique. So I'm going to show this video now, which will show some of these failures. Okay, thank you. So now I'm going to talk about the current SpaceX rockets. And they have two rockets. They're two launch vehicles. One is the Falcon 9 and the other is the Falcon Heavy. The Falcon 9 launches cargo to and from the International Space Station. And that's the one on the left here, and it carries the cargo in the Dragon capsule, which is on top of the Falcon 9. It also launches commercial and military satellites, and it launches science missions. And that's the configuration on the right here with the payloads are inside the payload fairing. The Falcon Heavy, excuse me, Falcon Heavy is essentially 3 Falcon 9 first stages connected together. And the second stage is exactly the same as for the Falcon 9, and the payload fairing is exactly the same as for the Falcon 9. So this builds on their modularity concept, which reduces the cost. The Falcon Heavy can actually launch double the payload capability of any existing launch vehicle. Now I say existing launch vehicle because it still isn't anywhere near as powerful as the Saturn V launch vehicle that landed humans on the surface of the moon in the Apollo program. This also launches commercial and military satellites and launches science missions. The first launch of the Falcon Heavy occurred a little more than a year ago, and the 2 side boosters were actually reused from earlier missions. They had to pick a payload for the first launch, and nobody wanted to risk their expensive satellite on the first launch of a launch vehicle. So Elon Musk had a flair for the dramatic, and he decided to launch his own Tesla Roadster into space. And also they put a mannequin in the driver's seat. The mannequin's name was Starman. And this is an actual photograph. This isn't an artist's drawing, but this is an actual photograph of the Tesla Roadster with the Earth in the background. Now that automobile was launched into deep space out beyond the orbit of Mars. And here are the 2 side boosters landing from the Falcon Heavy launch. And I'm going to show a video now of the 2 side boosters landing. The 2 frames on the bottom here are actual cameras on the launch vehicle, the first stage, and they'll be looking down at the landing pad as they are landing. And the one in the upper right zeroes in on the engine section as the one of the boosters comes in to land, and the one on the upper left will show them landing. And you're also going to hear SpaceX employees that are cheering in the background.
The landing lights deploy at the tail end of that landing burn.
And that landing burn has started.
Both boosters looking to be on track towards their respective landing zones.
Landing burns have started. Side boosters landing legs are deployed.
And the Falcons have landed.
LZ1, LZ2, both side boosters have touchdown. Landing operators move on to recovery 1 and recovery 2.
And coming up very shortly, the Center Corps will be attempting its landing on the autonomous spaceport drum ship.
You may also be hearing the
Okay.
and watch for the landing.
So that was very successful. And on their Falcon 9, they have now had 70 launches, and 68 of them have been successful. That's a 97% success rate. But the 2 failures occurred during the first 29 launches, and the last 41 launches have been successful. So it looks like their reliability is improving. Now, they don't attempt a landing on every launch of the Falcon 9. because some of the missions are just too demanding. And this especially applies to heavy payloads that are launched to geostationary Earth orbit. But they've attempted 42 landings. 35 of them now have been successful for an 83% success rate. But if you take the last 14 landings, 13 of the 14 have been successful for a 93% success rate. So again, they're improving on their reliability. The Falcon Heavy has only had one launch so far. It was completely successful, except that only 2 of the 3 boosters were recovered successfully. The 2 side boosters were recovered. The center booster was supposed to land on a drone ship, and they ran out of igniter fluid on their engine and crashed into the ocean. Did a little bit of damage to the ship also. And their second launch is actually now scheduled for April 7th. That'll be this coming Sunday. There is some talk that it might be delayed for 2 or 3 days, but you might want to tune in. You can watch it on the internet on the SpaceX.com website, and be interesting to see if they can succeed in recovering all 3 boosters this time. So SpaceX has had a disruptive effect on the launch industry. Before SpaceX, the United States launch providers just couldn't compete with other companies. Russia, Europe, and China all had much less expensive launch vehicles than the United States. But that changed. SpaceX is now the lowest cost launch supplier in the world by far. Last year, they had 40 orbital launches, all of which were successful, and they launched more satellites into orbit than any other country except for China. And all the other launch providers are now in the panic mode, that they are losing so much market share to SpaceX that they're realizing they have to do something quickly. Now, besides launch vehicles, SpaceX also has their Cargo Dragon, and that resupplies the International Space Station. It launches cargo to the space station, but it also returns cargo to the Earth. They've had 16 missions so far. 15 of the 16 were successful. And they're building an entirely new capsule for which they call the Crew Dragon. And that's going to be carrying crew to and from the International Space Station. The first flight of the Crew Dragon was last month. That had no crew aboard, but it did dock with the International Space Station and was recovered successfully. The first crewed flight is scheduled for July 15th. And that's going to be important because that will be the first crewed flight of a US launch vehicle since the space shuttle was retired in the year 2011. We've been hitching rides to the International Space Station aboard the Russian Soyuz rockets ever since 2011. Now, looking to the future, SpaceX is designing an entirely new rocket called the BFR. Now, the BFR stands for Big F something rocket. So that could be Big Falcon rocket or whatever. And I'm going to call it the Big Falcon rocket for the rest of this talk. So that's, again, a two-stage rocket like their Falcon 9. And the first stage they call the Super Heavy, and the second stage is called the Starship. Now they have an illustration here which gives you the relative size of these rockets. The BFR stands a little bit taller than the Saturn V. This is a Saturn V, that's a BFR. And it's also much more powerful than the Saturn V. And that's the Falcon Heavy right there. So the plan is to recover both stages of the BFR, not just the first stage. The first stage, which is a Super Heavy, should be easy to recover because they've got the experience from the Falcon 9 and they pretty much know how to do that. But the second stage is going to be hard. The goal is that the second stage will be able to fly again with zero refurbishment. And that's going to be hard for sure. But the other thing that makes it even more difficult is that the BFR is not just going to return from Earth orbit like the space shuttle, but it's also designed to be able to return from the moon and from Mars. So when it returns from the moon and from Mars, the reentry heat is a whole lot higher than it returns from Earth orbit. So that's going to be a challenge to be sure. Now, in order to retire some of the risk of this vehicle, they're making a prototype vehicle. It's similar to the Grasshopper vehicle that they built to retire some of the risk for the Falcon 9. It's about 2/3 the size of the Starship, and they call it the Starship Hopper, or Star Hopper for short. This vehicle will verify the vertical takeoff and landing. It'll verify the Raptor rocket engines. Now, these rocket engines are much more advanced than the engines on the Falcon 9. They're the same size as the engines, the Merlin engines on the Falcon 9, but they have about 2.5 times as much thrust. So they're very advanced rocket engines. We'll also verify the stainless steel casing and especially the thermal protection system. Now, the big Falcon rocket is designed to take humans to the moon and to Mars and land on those bodies. The Starhopper flights are about to begin. They've already built the Starhopper. And possibly the first small flight that it takes might be later this week. But the first flight it takes, it won't go very far because it's going to be tethered to the ground. So it'll get just barely off the ground. But later this year, they'll be taking much more ambitious flights in the Starhopper. But they've also begun building the full-scale Starship and the full-scale Super Heavy. And they're hoping for the first orbital test flight of the full BFR next year in 2020. So they're moving right ahead at a fast pace. Elon Musk has huge ambitions for this rocket. He announced back in 2016 that he plans to send 2 Starships to land cargo on the moon in the year 2022. And beyond that, he plans to land the first humans on Mars in the year 2024. Now, there's actually no way he'll be able to meet that schedule. But especially since the Trump administration has sort of changed direction from the previous administration. And the goal now is to go back to the moon and set up a permanent base on the moon before we go to Mars. So I think what might happen is that the Starship will first return astronauts to the surface of the moon, and there's a possibility they could do that by the year 2024. They actually have planned a flight around the moon in 2023, which will carry a tourist, a Japanese billionaire, and 7 other people in a flight around the moon in 2023. Now, the government and Boeing, NASA and Boeing are developing an alternative launch vehicle called the Space Launch System. Like the BFR, it's in the class of a super heavy lift launch vehicle. And it's designed to take humans to the vicinity of the moon and the vicinity of Mars, but it doesn't have the capability to land on the moon or on Mars. Now, unfortunately, Boeing's performance on this project has been abysmal. That they spent $14 billion on development of this system already, but they're years behind schedule and they have not yet made their first launch. They do plan to make their first launch. It's scheduled for next year, but it'll be late next year if they do succeed in pulling it off next year. So I'd like to compare the Space Launch System with the big Falcon rocket. Space Launch System is fully expendable, 100% expendable. Whereas the big Falcon rocket is fully reusable, 100% reusable. The Space Launch System is unable to land on the moon, but the big Falcon rocket, the second stage Starship, is designed so it can land on the moon. And similarly for Mars, the SLS is unable to land on Mars, but the BFR, the second stage Starship, can land on Mars. The Space Launch System they're developing 3 different configurations of increasing capability. The first configuration will be launched in 2020, they hope. And then the next configuration, 2024, and the third configuration, 2028. It's only the third configuration that will have more capability than the Saturn V rocket that launched Americans to the moon. Now the BFR will only have one configuration. They're developing their final version right off the bat, and it will be able to land launch 150 tons to low Earth orbit. So that's more capability than any of the versions of the SLS. As far as development costs go, it's estimated that the SLS will cost $30 billion by the time they've completed the final configuration, the Block 2 configuration. Elon Musk estimates that the development cost for the BFR will be between $2 and $10 billion. As far as cost per flight, the SLS will cost about $200 billion per flight. And that's because it's 100% expendable, and also because there's such a low flight weight. They will be able to launch this thing at best 1 time per year. Now, Elon Musk has said that the BFR will cost less than a Falcon 9 launch. And the reason it will cost less, in fact, he says much less. he claims it will ultimately cost 1/10 the cost of Falcon 9 launch. And the reason is that it's fully reusable. It reuses both the first and second stage, whereas the Falcon 9 only reuses the first stage. The Falcon 9 cost about $60 million per launch. So that's a good estimate for the beginning price of the BFR, but it should come down over time. So that cost per year is only about 3% of the cost for the Space Launch System. So here's how a lunar mission would work. The Starship, the second stage, is launched into an elliptical orbit. Once it's in an elliptical orbit, it's refueled, and there are other Starships that are launched that are modified to work as tanker vehicles. So those tanker vehicles refuel the Starship, and it turns out that if you refuel an orbit like this, you can double or triple your payload that you launch into deep space. So the Starship, the fully refueled Starship, is then launched to the moon, and it lands on the moon. And this vehicle has the capability of landing on the moon and returning to Earth without being refueled on the moon. So this is a completely reusable system right off the bat, even for missions to and from the moon. And this is what the first lunar base might look like. You can see the Starship in the foreground. Now, Vice President Pence just this last week announced a new goal for our space program, and that's to land humans on the lunar surface by the year 2024. The previous goal that NASA had was 2028. So this is a very large acceleration of the lunar program. It turns out that NASA has its own plan for how to land humans on the moon. And NASA's plan would be to first construct a lunar orbiting space station, which they call the Gateway. They would then use the Space Launch System and the Orion spacecraft to take astronauts to and from this lunar orbiting space station. Now, the Orion spacecraft is similar to the SpaceX's Crew Dragon spacecraft, but it's built by Lockheed Martin. But it turns out that the SLS and Orion spacecraft, neither of those has the ability to land on the moon. So they would need additional spacecraft to land on the moon. So they're planning a new lunar lander, and it would be a two-stage vehicle with a descent stage and an ascent stage similar to the lunar module during the Apollo program. But that doesn't quite do it, so they need another new vehicle also called a transfer vehicle. The transfer vehicle transports the landing vehicle from the location of the Gateway, which is a distant lunar orbit, to a low lunar orbit. So there are a lot of elements in this program. It's a rather complex plan, and there's just zero chance that they can accomplish this by 2024. And I don't care how much money they spend on it. They don't have enough time. It's just not enough time. And the reason is that all they've done so far is some very preliminary studies. They haven't even picked the prime contractors yet for all these elements. And there's just not enough time to do that. No way. So if they really are serious about landing humans back on the moon by 2024, their only hope is the BFR, because the BFR, the development started about in 2016, and it's about to start flight testing. So that's their only hope. Now, there is a problem that NASA right now is only funding their own plan, that they haven't given any money for the development of the BFR. In fact, they've been acting as though the BFR doesn't exist. So it turns out that if they're ever going to meet this goal of 2024, it will require a significant amount of funding to be given to SpaceX to further accelerate the BFR. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. So now I want to talk about the missions to Mars. And the architecture, it's somewhat similar to what they're doing for the moon. They launched the Starship into a low Earth orbit, that's right here. And then they refuel it with other starships which are modified to act as tanker vehicles. And they'll need several of those to fully refuel the Starship. And once it's fully refueled, then it launches to Mars and lands on Mars. Now, it's an extremely capable system. It can land 100 tons of cargo on Mars, or 100 people on Mars. So this is the vehicle that Elon Musk is planning to use to establish a city on the red planet. It lands on Mars, and by then it's used up all of its fuel. So in order to come back home, they have to refuel it on the surface of Mars. And they do that using Martian resources through a process known as in situ resource utilization, or ISRU. And then the Starship, when it's refueled again, can fly back to Earth and land on Earth. Now the astronauts can come back to Earth in the Starship if they so choose, but the plan actually is that at least some of the astronauts would stay behind to begin the first human settlement on Mars. So I skipped one here. This shows how the first human settlement on Mars might grow. And the plan is to grow it to about 1 million people, which is the size of a city. And Elon Musk has said that he himself would like to retire to Mars in his later years. So this is another view of a growing city on Mars. And I'll tell you a little bit about Mars. It has an atmosphere which is roughly 1% as thick as Earth's atmosphere, so it's nearly a vacuum. You'd have to wear a spacesuit, of course. And Mars is very cold. The average temperature is minus 64 degrees Fahrenheit. But in a spacesuit, you would be just fine. The spacesuit would keep you warm. Mars is smaller than the Earth. It's only about half the diameter of the Earth, so it has less gravity, 38% of Earth's gravity. And Mars has seasons, but because Mars is further away from the sun than the Earth, the seasons are longer. It takes longer for Mars to orbit the sun. The length of a day on Mars is 24.6 hours. Now, it's just exceedingly lucky coincidence that the length of a day on Mars is very close to that of an Earth day. I think this is something that humans can adjust to. People would be able to sleep half an hour extra each night, so it shouldn't be too bad. Mars has all the resources needed to establish a city. It's got its abundant mineral resources. It's got plenty of oxygen, plenty of hydrogen, plenty of nitrogen. There are all sorts of materials from which you can make plastics or concrete or building materials, the metals, everything you need for a city. And it's got water, which is very important. Doesn't have as much water on the Earth as the Earth. And doesn't have liquid water on the surface because the atmospheric pressure is too low to have liquid water on the surface. But it's got plenty of water in the form of ice and also in the form of permafrost. It's got thousands of times as much water as the moon. So to wrap this up, I want to tell you, you've already figured out, I'm sure, that I'm a big advocate of sending humans to Mars. And I want to explain the reasons why I think we should do this. There are actually several different reasons. The first reason is, and this particular reason is the one that Elon Musk most cites when somebody asks him what the reason is. It's to ensure the survival of the human species. Carl Sagan once said, humanity will either become spacefaring or we will become extinct. The dinosaurs became extinct when an asteroid hit the Earth about 65 million years ago. And it's been said that the dinosaurs went extinct because they didn't have a space program. The second reason to go to Mars is for the knowledge, because Mars can teach us much about the Earth. And there's the question, is there past or present life on Mars? Now, it turns out that in its early history, Mars was actually very much like the Earth. In fact, scientists now believe that Mars actually had oceans on its surface in its early history. So since life started on Earth in its very early history, you'd think that perhaps it might have started on Mars also. So scientists will be looking for evidence of past life on Mars or even present life on Mars. And what we find out will tell us a lot about the prevalence of life in this universe. Another reason is for international cooperation. The International Space Station has certainly been a great example in that respect. Going to Mars for sure is going to cost a whole lot of money. And by using international cooperation, we can help defray the costs. But whatever the cost is, it's a small price to pay if it helps to bring about world peace. And another reason is the spin-offs and the various things that are stimulating our economy from the space program. The Apollo program helped to bring about the home computer revolution. And it did that because at the time of Apollo, the computers were taking up the size of a large room. And they had to develop a crash program to miniaturize the computers so they could fit in the command module and the service module of the Apollo craft. And it's no coincidence that the first computer companies like Apple and IBM, these were American companies, and the two leading manufacturers of CPU chips these days, Intel and AMD, are American companies. But beyond that, the space program has created whole new industries, and these industries produce high-paying jobs. Some of the industries created by the space program include the communications satellites, the weather satellites, the remote sensing satellites that are used for agriculture, the reconnaissance satellites, the global positioning satellites, and more recently, space tourism. Future new industries may include satellite servicing, asteroid mining, and lunar mining. And the final reason I'd like to incite, and this is an important one to me, is to inspire young people to enter the STEM careers. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And I think this is very important. It turns out that during the Apollo program, the number of graduates in the STEM careers doubled during this period. And that was at all levels, the graduate level, the master's degree level, and the PhD degree level. And it's also true that at this time, China is graduating 6 times as many engineers as the United States. And I think that's something that we should be concerned about. So to me, this is very important. And I must say, I know that this works because it was the space program and the particularly the Apollo program that got me inspired to be an aerospace engineer many years ago. So questions? In the back?
Right here. Hold on just a second, sir.
I'm Jackson. Why is vertical takeoff and landing the best way to do it?
Well, first I'll say why parachutes are a bad idea. They tried the parachutes. They got it to land vertically, but when it toppled over, the rocket casing just split apart right away. And not only that, but the seawater creates a lot of corrosion, which is bad because you want to be able to refurbish it and fly it again right away. And with all the corrosion, it would have to be, you know, it would take some time to refurbish. So that's a bad idea. Now you could put wings on it and try to fly it back, but then you'd have to put like a jet engine or something to power it back to a runway landing. And that adds a lot more weight because of the weight of the wings and the jet engine. So that's not quite as good an idea either. But I think one of the main reasons that he picked vertical takeoff and landing is because he wanted a vehicle that could land on the moon and Mars. And if you have wings coming into a runway, you can't easily do that, at least not for the first missions.
Questions? Right here. Hold on just a second.
Sure. I'm Bonnie. Jerry, how about other countries internationally? So if Mr. Pence and Mr. Trump are trying to put humans on the moon in 2024, is this a space race? Any other countries involved in this?
They are trying to get other countries involved. So far, they've got one other country that's committed to help us to construct their space station that will orbit the moon, and that's Canada. Canada offered to build a robotic arm for their space station, but it's sort of assumed that the same countries that cooperated on the International Space Station will also be cooperating on the new lunar program. Other
Question
questions?
right here.
Yes, I'm Roseanne. Without the ability to grow food, what would be the likelihood of civilization surviving on Mars?
Well, you could grow food in the Martian soil because they could make greenhouses on Mars. Things like potatoes. I don't know if you saw the movie, what was the name of it? The Martian, where they grew potatoes on Mars and other crops. So it is possible to grow food on Mars, but that's a technology that they haven't perfected yet. So the first human missions to Mars aren't going to depend on food that are grown on Mars. They're going to bring their food with them, but eventually they'll be able to make their own food on Mars.
I have read that the Soviets, the Russians now charge us $72 million to take an astronaut up to the ISS.
Yes,
Is
that's
that
right.
figure correct?
That's right, and they're overcharging simply because we don't have any choice but to pay them. They used to charge in the beginning $24 million, and they kept raising the price a huge amount every year.
Inflation,
It
right?
got ridiculous, yeah.
Who else has a
Law of
question?
supply and demand, I guess.
Who else has a question for our guest? Right here.
Hi, I'm Paula. I'm just curious, how long would it take to get to Mars?
That's a very good question. It depends how much rocket fuel you want to expend, but probably the first missions will take about 6 months to get to Mars. They don't, if they want to go faster than 6 months, it requires more rocket fuel that impinges on the weight that you can land. And also you're making it harder to land on Mars because you're coming in at a much faster speed. So I think the first missions will be about 6 months. Now, same thing coming back, about 6 months back. But the catch is you can't come back right away because Mars and Earth aren't aligned right. So you have to spend about 1.5 years on Mars. So the first mission will be about 2.5 years long. And that's challenging, of course, but if you look back on history, there's precedent for that. If you look like Magellan's circumnavigation of the Earth, that was a similar time period. And that's probably a mission that was more risky than going to Mars. They started out with 5 ships, and only one of them made it back safely. And most of the crew was lost. Magellan himself died during the journey.
Good comparison. Other questions?
I'm Roan. Is Elon Musk spending any money or effort on theoretical physics and trying to figure out a way to get to Mars and back in a week instead of 6 months?
There are ways that might be done. If they had nuclear fusion propulsion, for instance, or antimatter propulsion, they could do it like in a week or 2. But we don't have that yet. With the chemical rocket engines that we have today, we're limited to about 6 months or so. Now, Elon Musk has said we might do it in 3 months by using a lot of propellant. But then that creates problems in itself. There is something to be said for going there quickly because you get less radiation. But I think the first missions will probably be about 6 months long. Bonnie,
Hold tight.
or, yeah.
Bonnie again, sorry. Who gets to go? 100 people, who gets to go?
Right. Oh, I didn't mention that, but what he wants to do, his business plan is to fund it by people that pay a lot of money to go. So he's figuring a ticket to Mars would cost about $500,000, you know, about the cost of a nice home. But some people who are retired, they might want to do it, you know, why not? So that's one of the ways he's going to fund it is through selling tickets to Mars. And there are other ways that he's planning to fund this. He's, of course, hoping that NASA will help fund it. And we don't know that they'll do that yet. They haven't so far, but another way is that he's planning point-to-point launches with the BFR. So you could go from one city in the US to, say, someplace in Australia in half an hour. So that might be an alternative way of selling it. But this BFR is, you know, it's really a giant leap ahead of anything we've had so far if it works. So we're hoping that it will work. And I think there's a pretty good chance it will work.
I'm Gene. Did Elon Musk get a lot of his money for Tesla from us taxpayers paying a subsidy on electric vehicles?
Tesla got one loan from the government. Now this loan was heavily criticized at the time. I know Romney, who was the presidential candidate at the time, heavily criticized giving them that loan. But that loan was actually paid off early. It was paid off in full early. So there are no, and in the way of subsidies, they do have subsidies for electric cars, not just aimed at Tesla, but that's aimed at hybrid cars. That has some subsidies in the tax code. But it turns out that the oil companies also have subsidies. They've had subsidies for a long, long time, and the nuclear industry also has subsidies. So it's nothing different than the other industries. Back there.
Here's another question.
My name's Lisa. The comparison between Elon Musk, his rocket, and then what NASA's working on, you know, sidelining. Logically, I grew up very competitive, you know, the best person wins, or the one that's, you know, that's how it is. It's not everybody gets a trophy the way I grew up. Why wouldn't NASA take that technology and work together with the best minds together to help Elon Musk? Why is it a competition when they're losing? I mean, what is the logic behind them continuing to spend money?
Well, I've been asking the same question. That's a very good question.
I think it's called government, isn't it?
Yeah, it's called government. I think what happens, there's something called the Space Military Industrial Complex. And what happens is that a big contract like the SLS, they spread the work all over the country in a whole lot of congressional districts, and then they get a lot of support in Congress by doing that. And it's very hard to kill a program like the Space Launch System for that reason. I think the Space Launch System will keep going until the time that the BFR shows that it works. Once the BFR shows that it works, I just can't see any justification for continuing the Space Launch System.
Last question right here.
Karen, my name is Karen. What do people do on Mars for a year and a half? Let's say I'm retiring and I'm going to be living on a spaceship. They don't have to
I don't think that mic's working. Let me repeat the question. What would people do on Mars for a year and a half?
Right. Well, the first missions, they would be conducting science for sure. The geologists and the biologists would just love to be on Mars to conduct science. But eventually, when they have these cities, they're planning to have restaurants and pizza joints and all sorts of amenities. Yeah. That. Right. Well, you wouldn't think that many people would want to go, but it's like 1% might want to go, but that's a lot of people. It's, you know, it's a challenge. There are some people that just like to do that thing, that have an adventurous spirit. I must admit, I would like to go. I don't think my wife will let me though.
Let's thank our fascinating guest tonight. What an incredibly interesting presentation, Jerry. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I've just got to bore you with this thing that I've been thinking about all night. So in 9th grade, okay, I had this teacher. She was a drill sergeant. Okay, her name was Mrs. Phillips. She was an English teacher. She walked the halls. Every couple days, she made us memorize verses of poetry because she was a poetry Nazi. And it was terrible. And she'd come up and she'd say, "What's that verse?" So I've got a verse from 9th grade that I was so reminded of about what to me is so exciting about the space program. It was a verse by Robert Browning. And it said, "Ah, but a man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for?" And that's what's so exciting about the space race coming back, that we're pushing ourselves to do exciting things like this, because we just can't stay the same or we'll be just like Carl Sagan. And for our first Mars visitors, Bob and Donna here from Evendale, my only request would be when you get up there that you will start the first EmpowerU on Mars, please. One last thing I wanted to share with you tonight at our April 15th class on the anniversary of the Tea Party, that Brian Thomas will be here that night to, he'll be giving his own interpretation of what the Tea Party actually accomplished and what is left to be accomplished. So he's going to be joining our crowd. So it's been wonderful. It's so good to have different topics like this that make you think about things, open your mind. It's empowering because it makes you think about things you don't think about before. So for your friends who may have missed the class, who want to know about this, just direct them to EmpowerUOhio.org. Tomorrow about 5 o'clock, this class will be up there and you can just watch it back. We will look forward to drinking some coffee with you, hopefully Thursday night, maybe a little bourbon next week. And thank you all for coming. Have a great night.